welcome. I wonder if any of you watching this have actually seen the Grand Canyon in California, in America. If not, you've probably seen photographs or even in film, video of this. It's one of the wonders of the world. Can you imagine standing on one side or the other of the canyon and looking down the 1,500 feet or 460 meters down to the Colorado River running in the valley below? Could you imagine what it would be like to try and walk across the space from one side of the canyon to the other? It's a difficult thing to imagine, but I think most of us would be able to imagine our reactions at having to look down into the canyon.
See you soon. Thank you, Lord. That's a precarious spot. All right, guys, thank you. Woo, that's a view there, buddy. Praise God. This is awesome. Thank you, Jesus, for this beautiful view.
Praise God, this is awesome, were the words that we heard Nick Waldner saying as he did walk across the 1/4 mile from one side of the Grand Canyon to the other, walked across on a piece of wire that was 2 inches or 5 centimeters thick. That was just a few years ago. I wonder what your reactions were when you saw that. Well, that's no attraction for me. You'd never get me trying to do anything like that. The man must be crazy. Or else, he must be fearless. He just has no fear. He was born without it. Neither of those statements actually are accurate. The amazing thing about this walking into space is that we are all invited to do this as human beings. Walking across the abyss, or rather dancing across the abyss, is the way most of our spiritual literature expresses it. And watching a fellow human being risk walking that distance with a drop of over 1,500 feet below him might help to make that symbolic language of the literature, of the spiritual literature, come alive for us. Nick Waldner was trusting in his skill, his experience, his training, and the people who were helping him. He couldn't have set up that whole experience by himself. A great deal of trust was needed for him to even attempt this. But you probably heard him make remarks throughout the small sequence we saw of the journey, the 1/4 mile journey across the Grand Canyon, like that one. This is awesome. Praise be to God. Praise be to God. And we ask, was his trust not totally in the one who alone is? We call God by so many different names, and not in his skill or his experience. We are called to that degree of trust, a total trust in God, to risk my own spiritual depth, to risk an entry into the mystery, the one who is the source of all, who is also timeless and formless, and beyond my capacity to know with my mind. The abyss. It's not possible to see down or to measure the depth of my own inner spirit, nor, frankly, the other shore. But relax. It's a question of replacing our fear with trust. And it's a moment perhaps to look more carefully at fear in my own life. We usually think of fear as a negative experience from which we want to be freed, but in two ways fear can be a very positive. It's a life-saving experience. Without it, we would not survive. We all have an inborn fear of physical danger. It's essential for our survival, as I've just said. We have a fear of falling. And so did the man we just saw walking on a 2-inch or 5-centimeter piece of wire. A fear of falling. Experiments have been done with very small babies, putting them on a thick glass sheet that is over a sheer drop. And the baby who is learning to crawl, when he comes to the edge and sees the drop, will not go on. It's a fear instinct for survival in all of us, and there are others. But there are also the fears that we are taught, the fears that are conditioned into us. Some of them we learn once, one trial learning, like fire. We put our hand into the flame once and we know for life that fire burns and damages. There are also fears that are taught. People who are afraid of dogs, or afraid of hell, or afraid of other human beings. Do you remember the song in one very famous musical that outlined this? We have to be taught to be afraid. A people whose skin is a different shade, or people whose eyes are oddly made. We have to be carefully taught. We have to be taught before it's too late, at least by 6 or the very least 8, to hate all the people my family hates. We have to be carefully taught. How many fears that we have been taught have been conditioned into our consciousness, lie at the root of our violent and confused human family today. Fear, psychological fear, is very often experienced as loneliness, rejection, powerlessness, fear of the stranger, fear of the unknown, fear of hope, no hope. Above all, fear of death, or what comes then, if anything. And sometimes these fears lead people into deep depression or even suicide. And that's why we have developed so many social and psychological therapies, ways to heal our fears, our conditioned fears. Often these therapies can help us to reduce the impact of fear. Because if untreated, then these fears will always lead to violence, confusion, panic, hatred. We could be describing the current world crisis: violence, abuse, war, hatred, all arising out of fear. Our worldwide war of terrorism, generating fear, that's what it's about. It's a war in which you generate fear and panic in other people. And so you don't look for the army, those prepared to fight. You look among the ordinary human beings, the ordinary everyday life and experiences of others, in order to generate fear. As if you make people fearful, you will make them violent. And they end up destroying each other and themselves. So, all religious traditions have seen this as a tragedy. All have sought to teach us how to get rid or to overcome this negative fear. All religious traditions have offered a way of hope and peace. Perhaps the challenge for some of us at this moment is to go back and find our roots in one of those religious traditions that had much to teach us. Not the external organizations, but the depth of wisdom. You know, it is essential that we hear today the original wisdom, the truth that comes in all the traditions. Otherwise, one of the most destructive of the social fears is that of people of another religious tradition. We have to distinguish fear and awe, being absolutely breathless with astonishment, being unable to think out how I can cope with a situation that is so overwhelming. The overwhelming realization of that mystery, the source of all that does exist or could exist, the whole universe, the ultimate reality, the mystery called by many names, God, Allah, Brahman, Tao, Yahweh, doesn't matter. The unknowable mystery calls us and invites us. We cannot invite ourselves. We cannot invite ourselves by thinking that we would enjoy it. We can refuse it, or we can accept it, or we can miss hearing the invitation. Fear of the unknown, the unknowable, the abyss. It's an awesome thing, the scriptures tell us, an awesome thing, to fall into the hands, to come into the experience of the living source, God. So, we are invited, I am invited to cross the abyss, that symbol in our spiritual literature. We cannot really see into its depth. There are no bridges to span it, no ropes to walk along. It is nothingness, it's mystery beyond our understanding or our control. we have to let go all sense that I can control the outcome of crossing the abyss. I have simply to relax in total trust. And therefore, we're told we don't walk across the abyss, we dance across the abyss, because that total trust in the great mystery who is the source of my life takes me beyond my desire to control. I can relax, I can dance with joy. Now, the mystics in all traditions talk about dancing across the abyss. Very special people, mystics? Yes. Very few? No. Many of us, and it should be all of us. The different religious traditions and cultural traditions have different ways of describing the experience, but in actual fact, they're all inviting us to the same thing. To find the joy that will help us to relax and just dance across the unknowable, the great mystery of spirit, of self. When we take the first steps in the dance, there is a deep inner peace which removes all those negative fears that we have learnt. The pain and suffering of the world around us will not immediately disappear because we have found inner peace and freedom. But we can respond more effectively to the pain and fear and violence we see all around us. If you go back to some of the quotations we've had before, held cameras, no washing blood of one's hands with blood. Go back to the ox herding pictures, to the empty circle, the dance across the abyss. And then the courage, the joy, the freedom to go back to the wine shops in that particular parable, to go back to the places which were once dangerous for us. We may not be individually engaged in violent war at the moment, but we have to take responsibility for that war all around us. We provoke the war simply by projecting those negative feelings and comments into the world around us. We are responsible for increasing the violence in others and ourselves. Nothing could be more essential for the survival of our human family today than that each one of us listens to the invitation to trust the one who alone is the source and meaning of my existence, and to allow myself to be invited to relax, to let go, and to dance with peace and freedom. Again, in our original literature, the emphasis is put on the discovery of that source, Brahman, God, by whatever name, the discovery of that one source. Because ultimately, when we do, as the literature writes, we'll discover that Brahman, God, Yahweh, is joy. all joy. From joy we have come, and to joy we will return. We are in difficult times. People are being enslaved mostly by their conditioned fear of each other, and very practically by the conditioned fear that has caused others to form organizations of fear and terror. The terrorists are also afraid. And if we can find a way out of the conditioned fear in ourselves, by recognizing it, by accepting, and by taking responsibility for letting go of it, and turning instead to trust the joy that has brought everything, including me, into existence, so that when I get the invitation, I hear it and can leap up and dance across the abyss.